Good morning. Both you here in the chapel as well as people who might be at home. My name's Sally Jones. I'm just stepping in for Byron today. Is that better? Okay. Good morning. I'm Sally Jones. I'm stepping in for Byron today. He and Beth are visiting family. And so today we get to finish up the program that was started called Becoming God's Family. This program was written by Carmen Joy Imes. She's a biblical scholar, and for those of you who have heard some of it, she's pretty remarkable in her knowledge. I'd like to just give you a quick review for last week. We saw two films. One was called Family Drama. Family Drama, the author explored contrasting approaches to inclusion of outsiders in God's family. And then the second one we saw was called Family Reunion. And here the author explored how Jesus reshapes kinship priorities and politics in the gospel. Today we have two films we're going to watch. The first one's called Family Business. We're going to explore hospitality, community leadership, and for the removal of barriers to the gospel family. And then the second one, the last one, is called A New Temple. And there we'll look at the New Testament vision for family. So we'll get started now. We'll take a little time between to talk a little bit about the film that we've just seen.
As I worked on my book manuscript for Becoming God's Family, Paris was hosting the 2024 Summer Olympics. One of my favorite sports to watch is gymnastics. I find it incredible how high athletes can flip on their floor routines or on the vault. Simone Biles, who is only 4'8", manages to catapult herself from the spring floor almost 12 feet in the air. Having never attempted anything more than a cartwheel or a roundoff myself, all of it amazes me. It takes a trained eye to distinguish between the difficulty of a double or a triple flip. To me, it's all impressive. Since I'm not immersed in gymnastics, I don't always recognize when someone has taken things to a new level. Reading the Bible can be like this. We're so far from the original context that we don't always know when to gasp at something startlingly new. The Apostle Paul is rightly seen as a groundbreaking voice in the early church. However, many of us fixate on ideas that were already well understood and did not represent a break with Jewish theology. At the same time, we pass by some of Paul's most radical claims without realizing it. That is to say, we gasp at his cartwheels and fail to notice when he's introducing an entirely new and more impressive stunt. In this case, we fixate on justification by faith, which is great and important, but it's already a standard feature of Old Testament theology. And we miss the real shocker, that the death and resurrection of Christ made possible a new community that dismantled major social barriers to unite people who previously had almost nothing in common. Elites and slaves, men and women, Jews and Gentiles, Roman citizens and non-citizens, scribes and shopkeepers. The new family that God knit together defied explanation. Scott McKnight contends that we can better understand Paul's letter to the Romans by starting at its end and working our way forward. As with most New Testament letters, Paul begins Romans by teaching doctrine and ends with instructions for living. The second half of the book shows us what the doctrine of the first half of the book should look like when we live it out. If we focus only on the first half of the book, interpreting it in isolation from Paul's practical instructions, instruction, we may miss the thrust of his letter. Romans 16 showcases Paul's theology in practice. Let's take a look. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church in Cenchrea. I ask you to receive her in the Lord in a way worthy of his people, and to give her any help she may need from you, for she has been the benefactor of many people, including me. He begins this grand finale by commending Phoebe to his recipients. She is likely the letter carrier, whose responsibilities would have included reading and explaining Paul's letter to believers gathered in Rome. Paul highlights her role as deacon of the church and someone whose generosity has funded his ministry. He urges the recipients of his letter to show generous hospitality to her. Phoebe is not merely a courier, but one to be received gladly as a sister in Christ. Paul uses sibling language, brother and sister, to reinforce new loyalties to the family of faith. Paul goes on to name 26 individuals and 5 house churches, telling his recipients to greet them. By doing so, they will already begin participating in the project near and dear to Paul's heart, building community. The list sparkles with Paul's admiration for fellow believers, female and male, young and old, Jews and Gentiles with Hebrew, Greek, and Latin names, some with titles, some without, some who are co-workers of Paul, and others whose only qualification seems to be that Paul is fond of them. Among these names are many women. Romans 16 is Exhibit A of the fruitful collaboration that is possible between men and women in ministry. If Paul wanted only men to lead the churches he founded, this would be a prime opportunity to say so. Instead, Paul commends Phoebe, a deacon and benefactor, Priscilla, a teacher of theology, Mary, a hard worker, Junia, an apostle, and many other women who have served alongside him in ministry. Our interpretation of 1 Timothy 2 verse 12 and 1 Corinthians 14 verse 35 must square with Paul's actual practice, which included women in many spiritual leadership roles. One of Paul's favorite designations on this list is co-worker, or those who work hard for kingdom purposes. We aren't told what most of them have done, but their essential contributions include hospitality, advocacy, and teaching. Paul does not take their work for granted. Timothy is one example of someone Paul calls a co-worker in verse 21. Timothy is bicultural, with a Greek father and a Jewish mother. Paul has taken him under his wing as an apprentice. But Paul doesn't say that here because he has no need to maintain hierarchy. Paul understands himself as part of a family that spans the entire Roman world, including all who have surrendered their lives to Jesus. It's an unlikely coalition, but together they have worked hard, taken risks, suffered, and loved well. However, not everyone in Rome is a member of the family Paul describes. He warns them to watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. If someone's agenda is to make them suspicious of one another or begin to tear each other down, they should keep their distance. The community must be protected against those whose aim is to undermine it. If we continue moving backwards through Paul's letter to the Romans, we find more insights on how to form faithful communities. Scott McKnight is convinced that Paul's instructions about the strong and the weak in Romans 14 and 15 are central to Paul's mission. If believers are going to be successful in establishing churches that include everyone, Jew and Gentile, slave and free, male and female, social elites and outsiders, then they will need to be able to navigate the inevitable social tensions that will result. We might not have the same struggles today as the early church. We're more likely to divide over political parties or cultural movements such as Black Lives Matter, immigration policies, the appropriate way to engage questions of sexual identity, whether Christians can or should drink alcohol, what women are allowed to do in church, which Bible translation is best, best or which style of music is best suited for corporate worship. But Paul's message for us today is just as urgent. Paul's vision is a dinner table where we pursue people who are not like us with the goal of becoming knit together as family. What if the goal of our social calendar was to eat with people who think differently than we do? What sort of world would this be if we moved toward those whose views challenge our own, rather than moving away from them? Our natural inclination is to sort ourselves into smaller and smaller communities made up of people who think just like we do. Social media algorithms facilitate this process. Forming homogeneous communities is even a church planting strategy in some circles. One of the great dangers in sorting ourselves in this way is that we can lose sight of God's purpose to form a diverse family made up of people whose ethnicity, social standing, education, gender, and gifting make a unique contribution to the whole. We often have more common ground than we think. The smaller and more uniform our circle of friends, the more likely we are to exaggerate our differences with those who are outside our immediate group. Take a moment to think about someone in your life who sees things differently than you do. Maybe they're here and you're here on one issue and you feel like poles apart. Try making a Venn diagram with overlapping circles and identify areas of shared experience and perspective. Paul has no patience for factions. The true family of faith is marked by hospitality. God calls us to arrange our lives so that we have room for others. For the church in Rome, the singular challenge to obeying God was the difficulty believers had in meeting together peacefully. Their different ethnic backgrounds gave rise to diverse priorities and values. It was much easier to stick with their tribes, sharing life with those whose language, class, diet, culture, and ethnicity aligned with their own. But to do that would be to miss the very heart of the gospel. The whole point of Christian fellowship was to celebrate and enjoy the peace between these factions that Christ had accomplished through his death and resurrection. They'd each been adopted into a new family. Paul would never be content as long as members of God's family were estranged from one another. Avoidance of those who don't look like us or think like we do is much easier than engagement, but it misses some of the greatest gifts God offers through the church. When we keep rolling backwards through Romans, we find that Paul spends several chapters making the case for Gentile acceptance in the covenant family. Paul intends to show that Gentile inclusion in God's family is consistent with God's original covenant promises to Abraham. He's thinking in terms of groups, Israelites and Gentiles, not individuals, when he speaks about election. The difficult
Does anybody have something they'd like to contribute after hearing that?
I came in with something that she touched on one hand, she was talking about accepting everyone despite the divisions. And on the other hand, I read the book, she also talks about keeping people out who, she said, they're undermined. We're certainly in an era where the differences are very great. And one community of Christianity will see another area of Christianity that's undermining their. And there's a conflict, I see a conflict in this idea
I'm going to try to explain what you said, Phil. Phil was saying that his observation was that in the program, Carmen's trying to say that we should be inclusive to different thoughts, however, to be concerned about people who try to undermine the group. And at this point, he's saying that oftentimes the interpretation of undermining the group occurs when people of different beliefs try to interpose what they're believing. Did I do justice to that?
I think we went through something that was similar to, you can see it on a grander scale, what's happening in this country with the different fractions of the different Christian groups. And even people, I have a friend who now won't talk to me. Because of the living word. And he won't even talk to me because of his, beliefs in what's happening with a very right-wing segment of our government and church versus what I think a lot of people in this church view things.
Does he feel like you are undermining his beliefs?
So Phil says that he's experienced a situation with a friend who won't talk to him anymore because he perceives that he is undermining his Christian beliefs. Is that fair to say? Christy?
I was just going to say, I think, though, what Phil was just talking about was one individual versus another individual. I think on an individual basis, we are much, it's much easier to find that commonality that she was talking about, and kind of breaking through barriers. When you're talking on a corporate level, like us versus them, then yeah, that's really difficult. Like it has to come down to individuals having conversations, and maybe you and your former friend will remain estranged, or maybe at some point you will bond over a football game or something that has nothing to do with anything, and you'll come back together over those commonalities like she was talking about. But I know for me, what and you were talking about, kind of where we are as a country, but even in our congregation, for Wade and I, we have done table talk groups, and that's been really eye-opening and just such a blessing to us, because I've got to know people that a year ago, and not to say, I don't know what I don't really want to talk about that right now, about any pain that's, or different thoughts on, where we've been. But I think we both are so thankful that, people are a lot more than one idea or a box that you put them in, about, what their thoughts are about one particular aspect of our church. I also think, just us talking and listening, that we're all so much more likely to be empathic listeners to each other once we just get to know each other, and then not put up walls to say, well, we can't even talk about this.
So Christy was talking about table talk and the opportunity to meet people and to really discover areas that you share in common, and being able to get to know people on that level, in contrast maybe to a bigger picture where you feel very
We're honest, we just didn't know them. We just didn't know them.
and she was saying they just didn't know people. And it was an opportunity to get to know people. And the other thing about table talk, if people are listening to this, is you keep the same group for 6 months. And then I think they switch the groups up so you get to know different people around a meal. Jim?
I want to talk about a concept called radical welcome. And it's a concept that I am familiar with work I was doing in Harrisburg, in the city, before we moved to York. And radical welcome is to welcome anybody. And when you see differences in people that you realize that they might have a different journey, they might have a backstory that leads them down a road that might be different than yours. And so the way I operationalize radical welcome here in York is through my philosopher 2-year-old grandson. And I take walks with him. He's been with us, our daughter's been with us since March. And we go on the Heritage Trail. We live out in Regent's Glen and we go both directions on the Heritage Trail. There's nothing like a sleeping baby in a stroller for people to notice, of all persuasions to notice. And so this week, something really powerful happened on our walk. And there were 2 days we went for a walk, and we walked toward York this time. And many of you may be familiar with the folks that are unhoused being kicked out of Hampton Park, York City, and those folks have to go somewhere. And what's happening is they're just migrating a bit to beyond the trail, often having cabins off the trail. So we're going toward York. We're coming back from walking through the Grantley neighborhood, which is a wonderful place to walk as well. And I noticed that there were 2 folks that were unhoused, really going at it. I mean, just blunt language. And we had a choice to make. We could turn around and go a different way, or we could go toward the eye of the hurricane. And so me, I'm not telling my son we did this because he went out of the gap with me. We just walked right into it. And they're going at it, and they're swearing, and I noticed the woman has a black eye, and they had a fight, obviously. And they went different directions, and they were not happy with each other. The very next day we were going toward York, the same folks were walking together, coming toward us. And I had a choice to make, and I said to them, I said, well, I'm so happy that you 2 are having a much different day today than you had yesterday. And they told me their story. I thought they have no place to be, they have no money. The woman was mentioning about a leg wound that wasn't healing. I said, have you been to the emergency room, because that's the only access to medical care that folks there can get. And she said, yes, but I can't afford a prescription. But then what she did is she looked down at our grandson who was sleeping, and she walked closer, and she put her finger down where he was sleeping. And we all know babies will grab a hold of the finger, and that's exactly what he did. And in that 25 seconds of doing that, that woman was not concerned about being homeless, about not having food, about the wound and all the misery of being homeless. She had a baby's finger in her hand, and life was right for her. And it was the most powerful moment that I was, this week, every week's a different week, this week to be a witness to. And that's our radical welcome, the trust that Jesus was there, and that I didn't know this person. I've seen her before walking. I mean, that's better than going on the trail. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I trusted Jesus to be there, and he was. And I hope to see her again to find out if she's been in the emergency room. And if she hasn't, then maybe we can meet at a pharmacy and we can get that medicine for her. But that's my next step if I see her again. That is a radical welcome. That is God-inspired. And that can bring people of all persuasions together somehow, some way. And there's nothing like a 2-year-old to make that happen. Nothing like a 2-year-old.
So I'm going to try to give this justice, but Jim brought up the concept of radical welcome, and he was able to extend this to unhomed people on the rail trail. And in a funny way, it involved his 2-year-old grandson, who enabled a woman who was homeless to show some tenderness. And he feels that it was an ability to be brought together with this couple and become aware of their needs. So I'm going to continue with the next film. Hopefully there'll be a little time at the end we can talk about it. Hey Nate, can you help me move this to the next film?
It is.
Oh, it is. Okay, thank you.
It's understandable that someone might be wary about joining the church. News headlines often expose the hypocrisy of a church leader expressed in moral failure. Our own experience may include church hurt of some form. Perhaps you have reported questionable behavior, but your warnings went unheeded. Perhaps you've been the victim of vicious attacks by fellow believers, or you've simply felt little connection between the content of your church services and the challenges you're facing in life all week long. You are not alone, and this reality is nothing new. Anyone who's read Paul's letters to Corinth knows that church life in Corinth was messy. Factions and boasting divided the congregation. Sexual immorality, infighting, judgmentalism, and disagreements over common meals and worship practices plagued the community. Paul's approach to this congregation is to remind them that to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. Whatever gift each one has is for the sake of others. Furthermore, all believers are baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free. That means we cannot disregard one another and sort ourselves into factions. As we exercise our spiritual gifts in love for each other, we are built together into a dwelling of God. The church is the single most important way that we continue growing as disciples of Christ. As we participate, we become the community God wants us to be. Is it any wonder that the author of Hebrews wants us to keep meeting? Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. The day that Hebrews speaks about is the day of the Lord, the long-awaited return of God to judge the wicked and vindicate the righteous. A community oriented toward that day is one whose ethical commitments are formed by a proper fear of God, recognizing his ultimate authority and rule. Churches that live in eager expectation of God's return are less likely to be distracted by the latest trends. The temple in Jerusalem was anchored to the spot where God's fire had fallen on David's altar. The temple faced east, permanently oriented in the direction of God's expected return. Jesus fulfilled those expectations in his first coming when he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey from the Mount of Olives, directly east of the old city of Jerusalem. The author of Hebrews devotes a great deal of time to demonstrating that the earthly temple was merely a shadow of the real temple in the heavenly realm. Those earthly symbols, the temple, the sacrifice, and the high priest, all pointed ahead to the rock-solid reality of Christ's sacrifice and Christ's priestly work that secured believers' entrance into God's most holy presence. In other words, our participation in the church connects us with something more real than what we can see with our eyes. The day of Pentecost pointed to this reality when when the fire of God's Spirit rested visibly on believers, signifying that the gathered people of God constituted the new temple. Hebrews turns from that deep truth to its practical implications. Family imagery is front and center. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, let us draw near to God. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, and let us consider how we may spur one another on. What emerges from the fresh access to the presence of God provided by Jesus is a family. The natural outcome of drawing near to God is meeting with one another for mutual encouragement. The Christian life was never meant to be solitary. Participating in a church community is not an extracurricular activity for those who want to be super Christians. Instead, church participation is the central means by which every Christian becomes part of God's family and participates in God's kingdom. We express our God-given vocation by serving the community in accordance with God's calling, not to earn a place in God's family, but to enjoy belonging. When we don't show up, some of God's gifts intended for the benefit of others are missing. It's easy to assume that if I don't show up at church, no one will notice. But something mysterious and powerful happens when we are present with one another. We've seen so much evidence of this on the pages of Scripture, evidence that God's presence dwells among his people. This course is about the community God is forming around himself as a dwelling of the Spirit, a family in which our relation to God also entails a bond with one another. Without you, I cannot follow Jesus in all the ways I'm meant to. We cannot experience union with Christ without also pursuing and receiving union with others. Each of us is like a Lego brick. A single Lego is useless on its own. It's neither beautiful nor inspiring. And the whole point of Lego is to connect it to other pieces and build something impressive. If I'm on my own, I'm not fulfilling my purposes. My niece loves Lego. Her parents recently remodeled her room and installed more shelf space so that she can display her Lego creations. Imagine if she lined up individual Legos on those shelves instead. That would be silly. Lego is meant to become something by designing and connecting pieces to each other. We are Lego. We're meant to connect. When we don't, we're missing out on our purpose. This should shape the way we share the gospel. When we ask individuals to decide to follow Jesus while the congregation has every head bowed and every eye closed, we reinforce a vision of the Christian life as a personal journey that's only between me and Jesus. God does not invite us to adopt a private religion that functions as a source of individual inspiration. Christianity was never meant to be a means of self-fulfillment or self-actualization. The gospel is not only a message for individuals, it's a call to become family. What if we invited people to place their faith in Jesus in order to become part of the family he's building? A family marked by mutual commitment to each other's flourishing. After all, Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Our Father," not "my Father." He urged them to pray for our daily bread and forgiveness for our trespasses. He doesn't offer a path towards self-actualization or fulfillment without including others. To share in the sufferings of others is part of what it means to become God's family. According to Romans 8, verses 22 through 27, God sends us, as he sent Jesus, straight into the pain of the world, to groan alongside creation as we await God's restoration of all things. N.T. Wright calls this the heart of the gospel in Romans. Surprisingly, it's not a vocation of victory and celebration, but of groaning and lament. He explains, part of our primary calling as followers of Jesus is to lament, to stand in the place of pain in humility, sorrow, and hope. This commitment comes with very practical implications. Paul leverages family language for a project very near and dear to his heart: fundraising efforts in Corinth for impoverished Jewish believers in Jerusalem. As Joseph Hellerman explains, Jew and Gentile are now siblings in God's eternal family, and alleviating a brother's poverty is first and foremost a family responsibility. By encouraging generosity toward fellow believers, Paul hopes to cultivate broader unity between Jewish and Gentile followers of Jesus. Meeting financial needs is one way to demonstrate unity. If we want to become part of God's family, we have no choice but to embrace our siblings and learn how to love each other, laying down our lives for one another and sharing with those in need. John expresses the theme we've been exploring in this book when he speaks of God's indwelling presence. Dear friends, he writes, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. The preposition in, God lives in us, could also be translated among, though all the English translations I checked read in. Perhaps our translations are the fruit of Western individuality. The sentence more naturally reads in Greek, God lives among us, and his love is made complete among us. If we want to experience the presence and love of God, we must move toward each other. Like Legos connected to other Legos, together we become the temple of God. Neither can neighboring churches be considered rivals. We all join in the same mission to reach our neighbors, praying for God's kingdom to be established on earth as it is in heaven. When we lived in North Carolina, we attended a wonderful gospel-centered church called Good Shepherd. Our pastor sometimes admitted that he was worried that another church would set up shop across the street with the name Better Shepherd. John and Jesus teach us the beauty of non-competitive collaboration. We are all on mission together. The church is like a fishing net. There are more holes than there are ropes, but it still holds me. My faith does not require any single person other than Jesus to perfectly live out its ideals in order for it to be true. The point is not the strength of those believing, it's the strength of the one in whom we believe. The point is also not the strength of our belief, but the fact that it's properly placed in the only one who is truly worthy. Here's what I know. He has never let me down, not once. Oh, I've struggled. I've lived through food insecurity and miscarriage and chronic illness and unresolved conflict and family estrangement and false accusation and deep disappointment and marital strain and parenting woes and spiritual drought. But not a day of those struggles was I actually alone. Jesus was with me every step of the way. Not only that, but the churches I have joined along the way have provided tangible support and encouragement. My pastor and his wife showed up for me in the darkest of times. Our church mentoring group supported us through the loss of a child. Our current church has prayed diligently for family members they have never even met. Fellow believers have brought us meals, packed our moving truck, cared for our children, offered encouragement, prayed for us, challenged us, and blessed us in far more ways than I can enumerate here. Because of the church, we are not alone. Who's not here? Who's not beside us worshiping on a Sunday or a Saturday morning? Where are our neighbors, our family members, our co-workers, our friends? Where are the international students, our area's recent immigrants, our unhoused neighbors? Where are the city council members and the high school teachers and the landscapers and the beauticians? Where are the fast food workers and the lawyers and the chronically unemployed? Where are those who stopped attending during the pandemic? Where are those who've never set foot in church? These are our future brothers and sisters. Men and women God is calling to be part of his family. I mentioned in a previous session that 16 million Americans who used to attend church no longer do. The same study that discovered this also learned something encouraging. A significant percentage of these people report that all it would take to get them to come back is a personal invitation. If you're among the 40 million Americans who no longer attend church, consider this your invitation from my heart to yours. The church is missing you. A throne is empty with your name on it. We want to worship and serve side by side with you. We want to hear your ideas and shoulder your burdens and share our sorrows. We need your insight, your smile, your tears, your angst, your laughter, and your yearning for a better world. Will you join us this week? Our plan is to gather and wait and pray for Christ to come again. Together, we are becoming God's family, and we aren't complete without you.
Any thoughts on this? Does it make anybody feel uncomfortable to hear this? Anne?
Well, I feel very unworthy hearing this because it's like to be a perfect Christian, to be a perfect church. But what I found really wise that she said, for some reason in our culture now we judge other churches on theology, and there are small things they will claim that are emphasized for them. And as my son said, Mom, I belong to this church because the fact they don't allow women to be ministers is a very small part of everything else they teach. And that is meaningful to me. So we need to become willing not to judge, but just be tolerant and realize that the focus is on Christ. And many of these churches contribute, that are different from ours, contribute so much. And I just feel so hopeful because the Alliance Church now is sending missionaries. They're allowing women to be missionaries. And I do believe they may be allowing women to be pastors. So Presbyterian Church allowed women to be pastors back in the 1954. The Lutheran Church allowed women to become pastors in the 70s. So you know what? Progress has been made. The Lord works slowly from our perspective, but I really see churches becoming more inclusive. And as a child, nobody played with me because I was Protestant, and they were Catholic. Now, there's not that prejudice between the two. And I have many friends who are Catholic, and they do not exclude me from their play or social groups. So I see hope and progress and loving each other regardless.
So let me see if I can kind of summarize this. Anne was saying that perhaps when she first listened to the film, she felt like we had not met up to certain expectations. But in hindsight, as she looks at changes in church, she realizes that we're being more drawn together. Is that fair to say?
Sounds wonderful.
We're headed, and she's hopeful. Yes?
I think if you look at someone and you want to find something to not like about them, you'll probably do it. But I think if you look to find something you want to like about them, you'll find that too. I think if you want to love someone and you're looking for the good, you'll probably find it. But if you're looking for an excuse to exclude them, you'll probably find that too.
Give me your name.
Dan.
So Dan said that if you look at somebody and you want to look and be critical and find something bad in them, you probably will. But if you look at them and look for something good, you'll probably find that too. So it speaks to how we look at others and what we try to anticipate. Any other thoughts on this? Sandy?
Well, the other side of Ann's story, I'm glad to hear what she said, but recently the Southern Baptist Church has voted to not allow women pastors. And any congregation that does allow it will be removed from their denomination. And that just happened like in the last couple weeks, so yeah, they're sort of moving backwards.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of things are going backwards for a while. I still have faith.
Yeah.
Maybe the people in denominations that leave because they don't agree. Amen.
I know, I'm speaking for myself, one thing I heard that really touched home is who is missing. And I can look around, and when I would sit here for the early service, I'd look around and I'd think to myself, who's missing? And perhaps it only takes reaching out and saying, I miss you. I wish you could come back. Might be enough to prompt people to return. Maybe not to this church, but to a church, to know the community of God. So that I really appreciated. Phil, do you want to have?
All that she was talking about, the inclusiveness, bringing people in. I don't know if anybody's actually, got to the end of this book, but they also talk about, and I'm just going to read a couple of things. It says, the Bible declaration that God is forming a family of faith in which we are invited to participate does not entail the erasure of boundaries. On the contrary, to be part of God's family and listening in the greater comfort of all, we are to be a holy people set apart from the world. Jude warned us about who would infiltrate the church while following their own ungodly desires. In other words, we need to be on guard against the dangers of absorbing worldly or ungodly values. Okay. We just talked about at one time the world and these ungodly values were, I'm going to say, accepting homosexuality. Yeah. Or women being, okay.
Would you say
So
we're not?
when you start saying we have to guard ourselves and be separate from the world, okay, that's what excludes people. So on one hand, they're talking being inclusive and reaching out, and the next minute they're saying, oh no, be on guard. We have to be separate from the world. I don't feel like I need to be separate from the world at all.
No.
I feel like I still need to be a part of the world.
But maybe they meant the value of the world. I mean,
So the values of the world, like a little while ago, were that homosexuality was an abomination. Gay people shouldn't have
So
the
you
right to
need
be
to-
married. But now we accept it, right?
so you be on guard of that, and you don't look to people for the answer. You look to Jesus and God. Right? In Taiwan, the bulletin showed who gave how much last week. Guess who's control of that church? Right? Do we go with that? Is that God's value or world value? Is that come from God? Is that come from people? So those who are against gay, did that come from God or did that? And we always have to do that. And then she also mentioned, pastors are not perfect. Do you follow the pastor body? And the pastor made a mistake. There thing happened in this church I didn't understand. But why is it okay with me? Because I'm come here to have my eye on Jesus. I don't follow the pastor. Pastor, inspire me. Give me messages. Challenge me. But pastor is not Jesus, it's not God.
Well,
So
okay.
do you follow their values? Say no woman can be leader. Some people say yes, and some people not. But the God is so big, we only have a piece of the puzzle. So when somebody else shows you the piece of puzzle, you refuse to see it. Even they are conservative, even they are anti-gay. There is something in it. If you look at it, it might enlarge your puzzle a little bit bigger.
Well, I think you're basically supporting what I was saying, is that out there in the world, people are saying, no, this is bad. You have to realize that you still have to be loving and see it in a different way. So I think you're supporting what I'm saying, is that you still have to be in the world and judge when somebody's saying, oh, no, this is totally wrong. We can't accept this. Or we can't accept that or this or that. We can't be looking like, well, we're separate from the world and we believe these certain things and this is bad. Because that's always changing throughout history. That what's worldly and bad changes.
We're having a pretty spirited discussion right now, talking about the values of the world, and Judy made a point of saying when we're in the community of God, we look to Jesus to lead us. We can't focus on the minister because he's human, she is human, and is subject to failure. So if we keep our eye on the host, on Jesus, it helps us to discern some of the things that are difficult to discern and do change generally, from generation to generation, like Phil pointed out.
I think that eye is being kept on love.
And Phil says the perspective is one of love because we worship a God who's a God of love. So, thank you very much.
So what I'm hearing from this wonderful discussion to me is to say we are in the world, but we are not of the world. That would be a Reinhold Niebuhr kind of way to look at it. And that is to say we focus on, and that's what she's saying, focus on the people being our siblings, not on what they believe. Look at them, not at what they're saying, not at what they're believing.
Okay, so
That's the looking with the eyes of love, which is God.
Right.
Looking at others as God sees them, as God's beloved child.
So Pastor Betsy is saying we are living in the world, but we are not of the world. And that when we deal with individuals, we look at the person versus their actions or what they say. And when we look at the person, we know that they were created by God just like we were. So we see them through the eyes of love because they're a creature of God's. Is that fair to say?
Got it. Yeah, you can disagree with people and still love them.
Yeah.
Just look at anyone in a marriage. How many times you disagree?
Sandy says you can disagree with someone and still love them. That's good words.
Marriage is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
You're never going to be 100% on the same page.
Yeah, marriages show that we can be with people and disagree and still love them.
And it would be important to remember that we're not saying, hate the sin and love the sinner, because that's still implying that you do not love that person because they're carrying that sin with them just in wherever they are. It is you have to love them, you have to love the fact that they're in that sin, and trust that God's going to move them out of that when God's ready and they're ready. I think we also have to humble ourselves and realize we may not always be right. You know what I mean?
Sandy says maybe we need to eat a little humble pie and realize we may not always be right in what we think. And how many of us have changed our opinions over time? I think I'm more...
If you're married and you're a man, you haven't been right in 30 or 40 years.
And Cindy will keep reminding you of that.
what I know is correct and right. That means you are done.
Yeah.
It ain't nothing to you for you to learn about God. It's nothing, God can do because you are right. So,
Isn't it wonderful to think that our journeys as disciples with Jesus have to be done in community? It's not something we do solo. I took that away from that, and that meant a lot to me.
I never thought about the Lord's Prayer being a
Our.
communal prayer. I always took that very individually, and I was like thinking about my own sin when I'm asking for asking for forgiveness, and didn't think about and just talking about how things have that the translation that is probably incorrect, and it should be
Among us.
in us. We are such an individualized culture that it's really hard for us to think about something at your spiritual life being being truly communal. Because,
Yeah, Christy just said she had never thought of the Lord's Prayer as being a communal prayer, which the language is communal, Our Father. And so, and maybe that is characteristic of our Western culture. And maybe there are cultures in the world now who don't see it as individual, but see it as communal. And maybe we should learn. Sarah?
I just, we all have arguments with different people. And my husband and I, through the years, when it starts getting serious, somebody makes a wisecrack, and we all laugh together. And that is a very helpful thing, just like you did. That's a very helpful thing in life, to be able to laugh and not take each other so serious all the time. Because, like you say, your opinions change, and today is today, tomorrow is who knows.
Sarah said that in their family they laugh together, and how healthy that is for a community to laugh together and share their joy. Anything else?
one night thing, if you're not in the table talk, join one. The last luncheon we had, it's just wonderful to talk to people, eat. It is incredible. I was shocked. I mean, I've done it before. When I do it, I'm sitting there, I said, oh my God, this is so good.
And Judy was just saying that her talk, help me out. Table talk, thank you. She was just saying how helpful that has been and how much joy it's brought her. And she's encouraging us to join one if we haven't. So, thank you. Thank you for your help today.